Start if that's good with you, Mark.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So welcome to everyone who's tuned in to the Hockey WA Coach Education Network. I'm delighted today to welcome Mark Bateman. We'll get him to touch base on a bit about him. I think this is a great leadway into the technology and analysis we had last week in terms of actually how we find and share information and actually gather information. And now we can touch on how to potentially implement and give that feedback to teams, individuals, and so on to develop coaches, athletes, and ultimately self-reflection as well. So Mark, I'll hand over to you and I really appreciate your time.
Cheers, Mark. Cool. Right. Obviously, welcome everybody to people that are joined live and potentially people that will be watching on catch up, so to speak. My name's Mark Bateman, and I'm going to be talking to you and sharing and encouraging you to think about how we can provide effective feedback within our coaching practice. But a lot of the stuff that we'll talk about will probably be able to translate into coach to coach, management team, how you might work and operate within your club as a whole. Okay. So a little bit about me. Obviously, if you, I am a coaching geek. So please feel free to drop me an email or connect with me on Twitter. Yeah, it's my day job, it's my passion. So yeah, I'm really happy to connect and help support anybody. In terms of a bit about me, I'm currently the England under 16 boys head coach. And Mark, is it worth you muted? I can hear feedback.
It's okay at my end.
Yeah. Just mute a sec. That's better. Can you hear me still yet? Nice, cool. Yeah, so I'm the England under 16 boys head coach, and I've worked in the national age group program within England for sort of, I think, about 10 years now, various different teams and in various different roles. I also do some work with GBEDP, which is a development program. So when I deliver as an assistant coach at times, and I've occasionally done some work within the central program, covering for the senior staff when they go away, and working with some of the players that haven't been selected. So that's generally my coaching history within an international setting. Within clubland, I've been the head coach of 2 Premier League teams, Brooklands men for 7 years, and Alton and West Warwickshire women for 3 years. And they've been in the Premier League. And my day job is around supporting coaches across all the Olympic disciplines. So essentially, they'll nominate some of their top-end pathway coaches to come onto a program of support, and I'll be one of the coach developers that delivers, supports, and mentors them through a period of a program period of over around 18 months. And we'll do some in-situ observations where obviously we're providing different types of feedback. They have a workshop or series of workshops, national events, and loads of other different bits and pieces that help them along their journey. So from a coaching point of view, this is sort of stuff that I live and breathe every day. I've also spent 2 periods of 6 months over in WA. Fortunate to be able to go out there as a sort of what you might call a paid player, an overseas player, playing for what are now called Suburban Lions. But used to just be called Subs, and the second stint was with Whitford's Hockey Club, where I think Mark's actually sat before he plays his game. So although I didn't play at the new centre, I was there when they were at Joondalup. So yeah, great place, and probably what I would call, probably my favourite place in the world. So yeah, really excited to share some stuff with you. So I think in terms of our approach today, we will look at some what I would call thinking tools. So models, academic models, frameworks that you would use to help support your thinking around how you might apply some basics around feedback. We'll then jump into some breakout rooms. So we'll probably run a couple of breakout rooms where myself and Mark will be in and help facilitate some of that discussion. really looking at which tools resonated with you, how you might use them, how you might pick specific bits out and apply those, and really getting a sense of you making your own sense of these tools. We'll then jump back in and I'll just share some ideas and some philosophy around how you might approach delivering the feedback. What are some of the common things you might need to think about and be cognizant of, and how you might do it. And then the last bit, we'll just have a bit of a play around and a discussion back in breakout rooms around what you might do with regards to a few sort of vivid case studies that I've put together to help us contextualize what we might do. So moving on, I think first thing to really think about is sort of what is the main aim of feedback. So and this is a really good line that really sort of simplifies what we're trying to do. We're about trying to get information, deliver information, encourage them to seek information that can be used to help performance improve, and or to help the person or group that you're giving that information to grow further, to develop and to get better at something. So that is where we would position feedback as a really important tool for that. And it's often something which we don't do particularly well, and mainly because we're not that sure of how we might go about doing it, and we probably don't necessarily prepare well enough to deliver that feedback. And we'll also at times be invested emotionally in the situation that you might be wanting to feedback on, and at times that self-regulation and management can also overspill into how we might deliver the feedback or how it might be received. And I think for me, it's important to consider sort of the world we live in now. There's definitely an old paradigm around feedback as sort of a monologic information transfer. So essentially, this is what I think, and I'm going to give it to you and tell you exactly what I think. And I would say that that's a pretty conventional way of feeding back. But we're definitely in a world now where it's more of an interaction, or what you might call a dialogic interaction. And the evidence has suggested and shows that this way of doing it, where both parties are engaging with the feedback, really does lead to sustainable feedback and greater improvement and buy-in to being able to deliver this feedback and actually enact it and action it. So yeah, I want us to really think about in our head, first of all, just as a reflection point for the people on the call, is where do you currently sit? Where might you position the feedback that you deliver? And where might people that give you feedback, where do you think they sit? So really starting to think about that and navigate those two paradigms, and where do we want to be? Where do you want to take your ability to give feedback? And as we talked about, we start to think about some of the key thinking tools that might help us shape some of this feedback that we deliver. And this one is the PEEC model, which has been developed by sort of a coaching, what you might call a coach consultant over in the UK, I think. And essentially it's a 4-step model to really help frame what you might and how you might give some of your feedback. So step 1 is really around thinking about the position of the feedback. So how do you position this feedback to, as it says here, respectfully tell the person you have an issue that you want to discuss? Now, this might be really useful in terms of almost a conflict management situation. So actually you've got something that is quite tough. The person who's going to receive it might not necessarily like to be told this particular thing. And of course it says they might be on edge when listening. So there's that emotional investment in what's saying. So position what it is. The second point to think about is really around evidence. So you want to make sure that it's delivered with evidence, not with emotion. So give factual examples of what is currently helpful or unhelpful. And if you don't have the facts, your feedback is nothing more than sort of a subjective judgment. So this is what I'm thinking. Okay. The third one is really to think about the effect. So actually take some time to provide that bigger picture. What impact might this feedback have on you? So potentially the consequences, and more so sort of what are the opportunities for growth for you? So I'm delivering this information to you, I've given you some factual elements that support why I'm giving it to you. And this is actually might be some of the things that might happen as a result of it. So really starting to think about that effect. And I'd also encourage you to consider this as you go along when you're preparing to give that feedback. What effect might this have? And almost play out some of those situations. And the last point to think about is conversing forwards or change. So how might you, what needs to be different? Be clear on the change. Think about time frames and when you might do it, when it needs to be actioned, but really think about, well, what needs to be different as a result of us, myself, the team, the coach, providing this specific piece of feedback or pieces of feedback. So that would be our PEEC model.
Mark, if I might just jump in for a moment,
Yeah.
in terms of evidence, factual examples, can you give us a couple of examples of what the evidence might be? Helpful.
Yeah. So when I'm looking to provide feedback that might be, considered probably, or would make people be on the edge when they're listening. So I think the perfect example will be around deselection. I try to provide a variety of types of feedback or examples. So it might be actually, this is an area where you really need to work on. These are the reasons why, and this is why it's applicable within the international game. But then I would start to think about, well, what might the effect of that be? So actually, how might I message that so that it lands softer? And then actually, when I'm thinking about how I might converse forwards or change, and it's like, well, these are the things that you need to do with a view to improving yourself from a long-term point of view. So thinking more so around or framing it more as a long-term process. I think often, particularly in coaching and particularly around selection, deselection, people will receive feedback, they'll go away, think they action it straight away, and then be like, right, why aren't I back in the team? So it's really thinking about that converse forwards and what it looks like over probably a longer period of time, because unfortunately we can't necessarily just action feedback straight away. People can't just change straight away. It's got to be something which they're invested in. Does that answer your question, Mark?
Yes, 100%. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Second one, which might be a bit more of a simpler approach to how you might do it, is the SBI model. And essentially it's really three areas: situation, behavior, impact. And this provides you with a really nice model to think how you might think about some of the case studies that we'll look at later on. So really around describing the situation with specifics. So again, thinking about taking out that emotion of what you're doing, and actually describing that situation, saying this is what I am seeing, as opposed to this is what I think. So describe the situation, describe the behavior observed. So actually saying this is what I'm seeing in terms of how you're behaving, for example, on the pitch. This is what I'm observing, rather than unpicking some of the emotional behavior underneath it. And then really start to delve into, and this is the effect that it has on other people. This is the impact of your behavior. So for example, you might have an athlete playing who blows up quite a lot, gets quite frustrated with themselves. And actually what you might want to start to do is sort of navigate this particular instance or this particular situation with the athlete. Describe the situation. You're actually, when you're playing, when you're making errors, you're getting quite frustrated. You are shouting at other people. And as you move into this, describing this behavior, and then start to say, well, the impact is the impact that you have on the others is they feel uncomfortable around you. They feel that they can't communicate with you. And therefore that impact actually helps limit or reduce the ability of our team to function as we would like. So really starting to think about how you might layer the conversation with some simple points, as opposed to going into something that says, this is what I think. Okay. And again, just when we're thinking about feedback, I think this quote is really poignant and really effective in positioning sort of where we're at with feedback at the moment. So it's from Stone and Heen, 2014, and it reads pretty simply: interesting. When we give feedback, we notice that the receiver isn't good at receiving it. And when we receive feedback, we notice that the giver isn't good at giving it. And actually that really helps, that paradigm plays out, and I've seen it over and over again, and I've been the recipient of it, and I've been the giver of poor feedback, which is largely one of the reasons why I've gone down a bit of a rabbit hole as to what are some of the effective ways of delivering feedback or having difficult conversations. And again, as we start to navigate these conversations and the touch points of where you might be delivering feedback, it's important to think about, again, another 4 key areas. So an awareness, don't understand or know what it's for. So this is how people might be feeling. And there might be a possible misalignment of understanding. So actually, they might interpret your feedback differently, or they might not be aware why you're giving it to me. So it's important that you set some context and give some context around this. Cognizance, so actually a lack of knowledge of how to implement feedback. So the coach might be thinking, I really want to be able to say to this specific player, I don't think that works, or I don't want to see that behavior, but they're not quite sure how to navigate that. And the receiver might have insufficient strategies to act upon the feedback. So they might receive feedback, but then not know how to actually use that feedback to make a behavior change in themselves. We look at agency. So they might be insufficiently equipped to deal with the feedback. So there might be some overarching contextual things going on with this specific person, player, athlete, where they might not be able to cope with the feedback because they've got other things going on. So there's actually that seeking to understand, which is really important. And there's a feeling that like doing so and acting on the feedback might be futile. So actually, how honest are we being around how that feedback might support? So are you giving feedback that is there to pacify them, or are you giving feedback which will help support behavior change that will then ultimately help them achieve the goals that they want? And then we look at volition. So how inclined are people to do it? There might be a lack of motivation, enthusiasm to engage. They might be unprepared to invest the time and all the effort. And again, we look at this model that helps support, whose responsibility is it to deliver some of those things. So it's based in academia, and I think in school, college settings, but we can layer our own context on this. So whose responsibility is it, coach or performer? And when we look at the 4 areas, ultimately we see that volition and actioning of feedback really does lie with the performer responsibility, but an awareness of how to give, being aware of strategies to give, is where really the coach's responsibility will lie. And then agency starts to become that dialogue between who does what. So how, as a coach, do I afford them opportunities to implement strategies, and how much as a performer do I take on board action and take advantage of the opportunity to do? And then what's my motivation to do it? So it's quite a nice diagram that allows us to think about where does the responsibility lie within delivering and actioning feedback in a sort of the coaching paradigm. Okay, so quite a lot of information there, and I'm conscious of the fact that I think I've spoke for about 20 minutes. So apologies for probably information overload. What I want us to consider within 2 breakout rooms, really, and when we go into breakout rooms, flick on your mics, flick on your video. We'll get obviously the introducing each other out of the way, and then let's just think about how might you simplify these. So how might there be some elements which really resonates for you? So actually, I've seen the model, but I really take that awareness and how I give feedback. That is something really stands out for me. So that might be a conversation point. And also how might and how can you apply some of these strategies in your environment? And I'd be really keen, and Mark would be really keen in the other breakout room to understand some of the things that you might take and apply in your environment. Anything from you, Mark?